Hello and welcome to Access Chat. I'm delighted that we're joined today by Professor Gregor Wolbring, who is the Disability Studies Scholar at the University of Calgary. So welcome, Gregor. We've been chatting a lot off air about your infamy or your fame, should it be? So please tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing. I'm excited to have you join us today.
Sure. Well, I'm born in Germany, trained as a biochemist, and then I came to Calgary as a postdoc. And then I became a faculty member within disability studies in 2008, and that's where I'm still are. And I do, in essence, disability politics, since I'm born, more or less. I'm a thalidomide person, a thalidomider. And so I deal with, public reaction to, not being ability normative all my life. And so I was doing politics all the time on the side, whereas I was training for biochem and so on. And then in 2008, I simply switched and do it full time.
Okay. Now, we have an intergenerational audience who the younger members of our audience may not be fully aware of the impact of thalidomide and what that drug impacted on the children of the mothers that took it. So maybe you could just explain what that.
Well, thalidomide, right?
Yeah.
Depending how you, phrase it. Of course, the public phrased it as the mother took a drug during pregnancy, and then you received this malformed child. Yeah. Right? That is normally the narrative around thalidomide, right? Defective product. And we were used a lot. The images of us, right, as our body morphology is not quite, up to the standard, right? I myself do not use that. That's why I also don't use thalidomide victim. I use, which often is used, I'm just a thalidomider.
Okay.
Right? That's neutral. Right. The same as, when people go on my website, they can see me how I look, without just the face. They can see the rest of it. And but in essence, I have no legs, but I have feet.
Okay. Yes.
Right? And so that, of course, then means that people, right, would call me walking impaired and all that kind of stuff. Right? Which again, I refuse. Right? I like factual language. Factual is I don't walk. Right? But walking impairment is a judgment. That assumes I have to walk. I just use, the same as we use neurodivergent, I call myself mobility divergent. Right? Which funny enough is no one uses. It's right. The only group where you see a positive imagery is around deaf culture.
I agree.
And then neurodivergence, right? All the others, are stuck with the impairment label, which I simply refuse, right? If I'm walking impaired, then, of course, the rest of the human race is flying impaired. Well, it is. It's a fact. You do not fly, right?
Well, not and survive. Not and survive. If your trajectory is only downwards, and then you have impact.
Well, that's not really flying. That is falling. But that's what, in essence, it's all about language, right? And I refuse to be labeled, in a right negative framework. Without, having any say. So only because I don't use, legs for mobility, I use other things. I crawl, right? Normally, and that again gets demonized, right? I published a piece called cherry picking. Right, because we cherry pick which abilities we want to see, and then if you have, not only if you then don't have them, but if you have some they don't want to have, you still get demonized, right? So crawling is, for example, constantly, used in a negative fashion. So that's why I'm simply a mobility divergent, right, and not walking impaired.
I love it. I love it. Can I ask a quick question? I just want to, sorry, Antonio, you made a comment about the mothers using these drugs, using these drugs. And I just want to make some comments there because The mothers, of course, as Gregor will know, use these drugs because our doctors told us to use these drugs. And the reason why they were using these drugs were because to help so that, excuse me, I have a cough. If I remember correctly, I think it was to really, if the mother was having pain during her pregnancy and stuff, it was supposed to help the mothers feel better. The mothers had no idea that if they took this thalidomide, that it was right. The pharmacy companies had not, well, the data was not given. We learned it on people like your mother and you, Gregor. And so I just want to state that this was things that women took because they thought they were doing the right thing by themselves and by their babies. That's what they were told.
Well, originally thalidomide was developed as a sleeping pill.
All right. I was trying to remember what it was.
That's how it started, right? It had nothing to do with, and it was used as a sleeping pill because you could not overdose.
Oh, all right.
So it was seen as a safe alternative to sleeping pills where you can kill yourself.
Okay.
Right. That's how it started. And the pregnancy one, that was not the that was not the market. But of course, a lot of women are having sleeping problems.
Right.
And then they took it. Right. That is actually the one could have a tagline around thalidomide. The original idea when they're developing it was that it would be an antibiotic. And that is what it never became. Right. Literally every application of thalidomide was found by accident because you used it for something else and which it didn't do anything for. And then, right, for example, E and L in leprosy, right, they found because they gave it as a sleeping pill to their people. So all the thalidomide applications were mostly found by accident, and the original idea why they developed the drug actually that it would never became because it's no antibiotic.
Right. I know that John Kemp was affected by this as well. Just for the audience that knows that amazing man. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and it was in the 60s. You can see with my beard. This is not, glaring out. I actually white. Not even gray. I passed that stage already.
Yeah. Right. We learned a lot from, as a society, these times with thalidomide. We did what we shouldn't. I think society learned a lot. So, but I noticed your work because you have really written some amazing disability, papers and really dug into research and stuff. And so I was very impressed with, and I know my audiences as well, because you're always like, oh yeah, I wrote about that. Oh yeah, and I wrote about that. Or you've really written a lot. You've putting a lot of content out there for our community. So that's one thing I would love to hear about. And then I know that Antonio wants to come in too. So let me give the floor to you, Gregor, and then to Antonio.
Well, the thing is, the only thing I can do is provide data. Right? I do very little in the community because of access problems. Right, so I do mostly everything right through my computer because that is accessible to me. That I don't have to worry about. Whatever doesn't work again. Right, given that I would say in the last 30 years, for me the access actually hasn't improved. Right, you can never predict where you get pitfalls. Whether it's when you fly somewhere, right, how often the wheelchairs get broken. And so on. So literally what you're doing is, right, as this is my adaptation in essence, that I'm sitting at home and do this from computer because I don't have to worry what might go wrong, right, on the journey, which in essence, many disabled people have. There was an independent study from 2019 saying 75% of disabled people in the UK have anxiety, right? Because they don't know whether when they travel, whether actually everything goes according to plan or whether they have pitfalls with accessibility, right? Which then I called accessibility anxiety, right? right? Or disableism anxiety, right? If you are constantly anticipating that you encounter problems, eventually you don't do that, trying to avoid that problem, right? That's what anxiety is about, right? I mean, you predict something and right, and if you don't know, and then you simply avoid certain things. And that's exactly happening. If you're getting constantly systemically discriminated, so disableism, eventually you try to avoid it and then you don't do this activity. That is not specific to disabled people, of course. I mean, this is simply, and you already can anticipate that you will have again a problem. Eventually, you don't do the activity anymore, right? That's simply how we as human beings, I mean, right, try to compensate, right?
And we have guests on Access Chat where we talk about that topic of traveling, and the situation is people end up going always to the same place because it's predictable. They know that it's going to work. People know them, and that's the scenario that we end up. That's something that we got from the conversation that we have been having over the years. We started this part of this conversation when you were talking about impairments, and terminologies to use, and I'm very curious to know how do you see this dichotomy between disabled and non-disabled in trying to get. There's a billion people with disabilities. There are people who don't have disabilities. How do you see this separation when, in fact, this is just part of the human condition?
Well, I don't like silos, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's why I use walking impaired, flying impaired, right, as an example, right? That's why the other one I normally use, if I'm confined to the wheelchair, which of course we read everywhere, right, then of course very likely I don't see your bottom part, but I assume you're all confined to your legs, right? I mean, the irony is I can get out of my wheelchair, whereas you can't get out of your legs, right? But the thing is, the people in power set the stage in such a way that, of course, they would not see themselves as confined to their legs,
Yeah. I mean,
right? Or confined to walking, right? Or assistive technology, another example. We call the wheelchair assistive technology within a medical framework, right? It's a medical technology, right? Right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, everyone uses an assistive technology. The snowboard is an assistive technology, public transportation, right? The bus, the car, the plane. Because we can't fly, we use a tool, right? The assistive technology of the plane. But we treat this as if only disabled people need assistance. Right, so we have developed a whole, culture of using certain words so you can other that group as being something special, as in not so cool, right? And that you need help and you have to be grateful, and right. And I use everything around that we are all in the same boat, right? Even when I coined the field of ability studies, I coined it not with the meaning of what we normally use ableism for, synonym for discrimination against disabled people. When I started with that, my part, there's of course, two others, like Fiona Campbell's studies in ableism and critical studies in ableism from Dan Goodley, right? Who both focus more on disabled people when you ask people what is ableism, people normally will say, right, it's discrimination against disabled people. I use this back when I wrote my first paper on it in 2008, as everyone has ability expectations, right? Some people like to have a cell phone, right, and so on. Every day you make bazillion, decisions based on abilities you expect. And then sometimes, these abilities become an essential. Then it's ableism, right? That you need this ability. And then and that is with everyone. But then what you do with this ability judgment is you can disable people but it's everywhere. For example, for the US listeners, right, the suffragette movement, the right to vote, right? Men decided rationality is important as an ability, right? Men decided women aren't rational, right? And then men decided women can't vote, right? So we're using ability judgments to other people constantly. So certain groups, you come up with certain abilities, whether you have them or not, because obviously women are not irrational, not more than men, right? But you use this as a tool to put yourself up in a superior position. That's also why we use a language as if only the other group is, a problem, right? There's, who we label impaired, who we call confined, and so on and so on. And so the ability I coined then in the way I do this is we have to look at ability judgments as a system critique, right? Because everyone judges and gets judged. And the question is, who has the power to put through their judgment and for what purpose, right? I, for example, see also ability, expectations, and ableism can also be used to enable. This is not, there's a difference between ableism and what you do with it, right? In many places, we use ableism, disableism as a synonym, as equal, right? But ableism and disableism are two different things. Ableism simply means you see an ability as essential. And then you can use it to disable people in a justify sexism, racism, casteism, and so on, right? And you can also use it to enable, right? The social determinants of health, the UN human security indicators, right? All of these equity, diversity, inclusion, to use the Canadian version, right? US is diverse, is DEI. I'm not so sure why we have to use, different orders. Is enable. Capability approach from Sen and Anand and Nussbaum is to enable the capability to have a good life. These are all about abilities, but you can use them to enable.
Yeah.
Right. So I use my framework in the way I use it as, simply as a narrative where I can question how we come up with what is essential. And it also constantly changes, right? There is an ability coming and people see this, oh, that's weird and eclectic and people are smirking. And then some of these new abilities move on to, hey, they're actually useful, right? And then some of these will then become, okay, you have to have them. You can't do without. So it's like a timeline. And then the next step is, well, what the ability you have now is actually obsolete.
Right. Gregor, right? Yes, Gregor, I have a question for you. I was recently having this conversation with some other leaders, and there's really a lot to complain about because we just really have not, this was the conversation. There's a lot to complain about, a lot. A lot of our accessibility inclusion efforts have failed. There has been some efforts, but it seems sometimes like we're going backwards. But I think from somebody like you that has spent your whole life doing this, what does it look like going forward? What do we do now to move this forward? Because we're redoing this world while we're all living in it, and it's very messy. But I just wonder, in your opinion, Gregor, and I know you talk about this sometimes. You answer questions on LinkedIn and stuff. But what's your hope for the future for us? How do we change all this brokenness we have?
Well, it's not that simple to answer, right? Because, there's so there's so many problems. The only thing I can really contribute to come up with a framework where we find a way that, a given problem is, we're all in the same boat, right? If we're setting it up as it's only the disabled people, right? Then it's, of course, right? And you can see I use disabled people, disabilities, right? Which, of course, when I ask my students in the first year, right, how to they always say people with disabilities because that's how they're conditioned, right? And I think it's a problem because look at all the other, right, marginalized groups. We don't say person who is a woman. We don't say person who is black, person who is LGBTQ2S+, person who is indigenous. Why is that? That only for disabled people, the solution is to ignore who I am and put people first, right? Normally, when you use a certain narrative, a sentence, and you put another group into it, and you're questioning that way how it's written, then there's a problem with it, right? So, people first, in essence, was coined from right, indeed, to detract from the disability part, because the disability part was seen intrinsically as a negative, right? So normally, people with disabilities really means people with a defect, right? And if that is a given, then it might be better to use that than a defective person.
Yeah.
Right? Right? Then we have people say identity first, right? Like autistic person versus person who is, having autism. That works within a given characteristic. I had to say deaf person versus a person who is deaf, right? It's not so much working when you use this disability as a group thing, right? Because then what is your identity? And there we're getting, right, what is identity being called disabled, right? And there you have two options again. Right, for me, when I say disabled person, that's right about, a person who is discriminated because they're not ability normative.
Yeah. Okay.
That's how I use disabled, because the problem we have is disability, disabled are used for two totally different discourses, the same word. One is how you define the body, and the second is how you, characterize how you're treated in society. Both use the same word.
Yeah. So I work for a multinational organization, and we have 70 countries in our organization, and the variance in how people describe disability culturally is significant. So we've taken an approach to follow the UN, which does mean that we use person first. But we've been writing a language guide recently, and there are so many exceptions to the person first bit, and then also when we're talking about neurodivergence, whilst in many terms in many circumstances it's been useful for having the classification of disability, many neurodivergent people don't consider themselves to be disabled or part of the disability community. So it's a really fraught topic, even within our sub community. So I was really interested to sort of hear your take and some of the spins on how we frame ourselves, and also how we frame assistive tech and the devices that we use. So not confined to a wheelchair. Tara Moss, who we've had on a couple of times, talks about her wheelchair as a freedom machine. It's the thing that enables her to go places. And I'd not thought about ableism in terms of a positive effect of people designing stuff to give people ability. So that was interesting to me. In the UK, we tend to use disabled people a lot more.
Yep.
And
but you use it normally with the meaning discriminated people.
People who are discriminated.
You don't use disabled people with the meaning of defect filling the word disability, right? Yeah. So use it, right? And the same as in the UK also, they used, right? They make much more of a distinction, right? Long time, right? Rachel Hurst, right? And Paul Miller, their paper for demos, right? Where they say disableism is the last discrimination, not ableism, disableism, right? So that's the thing. Every place has different culture, how they use words, right? We also have disabled people, right, who see their body as a problem, right? I normally use a matrix with my students, like a 2x2, right? You have two options to define your body, right? You can say your body is, a medical problem, and you can say your body is diverse, right? Whatever you want to use, right? So if you have cancer, you very likely will say your body has a medical problem, right? If you're deaf culture, you say, right, well, it's right. If you are right, lose your hearing, you're very likely to think more about hearing impairment than deaf culture, right?
Yes.
So then where the disablement then comes from, you have again two options: the body, which very likely a cancer patient will say, my body is disabling me, right? And deaf culture will say, my body that I don't hear is not the disablement. And you can say, the society is disabling me, right? And then you can have people, right? Deaf culture can then in the matrix only have on the bottom, right, social. So, your body is a variation of being, and you're getting discriminated by society. The cancer patient could do all kinds of stuff. The cancer patient can say, my body is a medical issue, okay? And then I'm getting, right, the disablement is my body and society. Yeah. Only because your body has a medical issue doesn't mean you don't have a disablement, as in the society treats you badly, right? And so for me, it's important self-determination, what I normally call ability, identity, self-determination. You should, right, be able to say how you fit. So there are many people who see their body not as a variation, right? Chronic pain, whatever. But they still then, right, should have the option, okay, so, right, I feel like I'm pain impaired, or whatever you want to call it. And then they can say, and therefore, because I have, pain, right, I get treated badly by society. Mm-hmm. But it's about everyone has different views, how they see themselves, and they should be able to use the full matrix in a way it suits them. The problem is that's not how it is. Disabled people by default have to identify as defective products because impairment is a given. Look at the UN Convention, right? It uses impairment of the body as a starting point. And then you also have some social discrimination due to that your body is impaired.
So you've got all of the ICF stuff, which basically just forces you into these boxes.
Well, the ICF also sees the body as impaired by default.
Yeah, exactly. It forces you into it forces you into a box.
Right. And I think you look at any document, impairment is the default. So it's like saying women have to say we are double X syndromes. Right, Deborah? Right, you're obviously a double X syndrome, right? Double X.
Yes.
Right. And I do normally the double X syndrome because most in my class are women. Right. You could and then you can come up with a scenario where you read that out, where then really women are diseased, because, right? The double X syndrome, right? Because they have characteristics which are only for women, therefore, and then you label it as bad, and then all by a sudden women are medicalized, which of course is not new. No. Right? Remember in the Middle Ages where they said hysteria was located in the uterus?
Yes.
And with that, man could guarantee that it's only women who are hysteric. Yes. Right? So anyone can set a framework where they and women could come up easily with an argument, with a lineup of specific characteristics of man, and then call it XY syndrome. Right? Yes. But the thing is, if the only way you get human rights by first defining yourself as a defective product, that is a problem. And I think that is why we have so many problems, that we are still fighting the same things over and over. Because reality, people we label as defective by default, as health issues. We're looking for health solutions, not social solutions.
So within the programs I'm running within the organization, we're taking a biopsychosocial model. And we're also asking people who don't consider themselves to be disabled whether they find themselves in a situation where they cannot do something, or a situation where they are disabled by technology, by circumstance, by management, etc. So we're trying quite hard to get away from that sort of medicalization model to really understand how we can, create a more enabling and inclusive environment. But it's not simple to sort of get that across in a multicultural environment as well.
Yeah, because it's not black and white, and I totally understand if someone, as I said, someone will, see themselves. We know this with, people who become amputees, right? They will see their body as impaired, because many of them, because they had legs before and now you get rid of them, right? You simply do not function normally as an impairment, right? So the thing is, you need simply be allowed, right, to do that. Often people say the social model of disability is not working because it does not take into account, right, medical realities. I think that's why you have to disentangle, right, that people should have the right of self-determination, how they define their body, medical or not. And then they have to also be able to say, right, whether, where the disablement originates, the body or society. And everyone in different stages in life and different stages of where they're exposed to will simply use different versions. The problem is that by default, right, you have to see your body first as defective. That's why with students, if you want to get accommodation, you have to get a medical certificate, right? In schools. Otherwise, you can't. You see, accommodation is another of these terms. When I get a wheelchair washroom, I'm told I'm accommodated. And then I say, well, there is a washroom there, period. And that is an accommodation to the human physiology. But of course, again, the ones who write the script would never see themselves as accommodated by having a washroom, right? So for me, having a wheelchair washroom is nothing special because, well, we accommodate everyone. Everyone needs accommodation. Right? This is not specific to me, right? The very building code is accommodation to the human body, right? So all these terms and that fits with the term of ability privilege, right? Which in essence was the reason to coin ableism originally, right? Saying, okay, how do people do that? Because once you have it, then fit certain ability norms set by certain people, you then have access to all kinds of other abilities, right? So if you have legs, then you get education, right? Or you can use transportation. But even ability privilege is a generic concept. If you are rich, you can do green consumerism, right? Like buying organic food, right? Getting a Tesla car and so on. But you need money for that, right? In generically, certain abilities give you the privilege of other abilities. But interesting enough is, also it's literally everywhere ability privileges and how they play them out. We hardly use the term. We use, white privilege and, but ability privilege is rarely used, right? Also, of course, it is, right? Everyone, depending where you are, right, depending on your background, you have right, certain abilities give you the privileged access to other abilities. All these terms, how I coined them over the years, are there to show that ability is a generic, right, reality. And we really have to debate, for example, right, how we deal with ability privilege in general. And then maybe disability becomes part of the solution more or less by default if we're questioning the very framework of reference. If it's all the time done just for disabled people, we're all the time running behind.
Yeah.
So Gregor,
yeah,
I have when organizations say to their sometimes internally to their own employees, or even sometimes externally, when they relate with business, when they say something like this, well, disability self-ID can transform business for the better. Do you agree with this?
Okay, say again.
Would you say that when organizations and entities are asking that disability self-ID can transform business for the better, basically asking people to identify themselves as a forefront to improve things?
Well, I know. I mean, like, because I'm in a wheelchair, there's no need to hide, right? Or no use to hide, right? Because eventually they'll find out, right? And I actually see my wheelchair as a very cool pre-screening tool, right? If people can't look beyond my wheelchair, very likely I will, clash with the people anyway, right? So for me, but we have a big problem, of course. If the cost benefit is high, right? If you're out yourself, right? That's why so many people camouflage, mask, right? Because outing oneself comes with a lot of negative consequences, right? And then they're trying, right? And then, of course, but then also the camouflaging comes with consequences because you're playing a role you are not. And eventually that leads then to burnout, right? And we published last year a paper on burnout, right, where we covered that, right? Because the thing is, if you constantly have to be someone you are not, again, this is not disability specific, right? This is for anyone, right, who has to play a role they are not, right? Eventually that camouflaging leads to burnout. And look at that. In Canada, 0.8% of disabled people are on the executive level on a company level, right? In companies. 0.8%. We're talking about the glass ceiling of women ending up on the executive level. 0.8 disabled men and 0.6 disabled women are on the executive level. Not 8 or 6, but 0.8, 0.6. That means, right, you better camouflage and hide who you are, because otherwise you never advance in your company.
Yeah.
Right? And that means you burn out. And that means we're looking now at the literature, and we could not find, for example, right, any paper on activist burnout. There's a lot of literature by now around that activists are burning out. Right? Makes sense, right? You're constantly, fighting, right, all kind of stuff, and eventually you burn out. Not one academic paper covered disabled activists to be burning out, right? And when you look at my work, all my scoping reviews, literally the storyline is all the time the same. I choose a topic, I look in the literature, I find nothing, I write the paper, and the storyline is we are not there. Totally boring, because I can use literally any topic. We just had one out on poverty, which shows that very little around disabled people actually on poverty. For that, in many places, it's at least 30% who are living below the poverty line, right? And, right, for example, the paper showed for Canada and poverty and so on, right, was in general already low. And then with disabled people, you have hardly anything, right? The academic literature is very biased, which research questions show up. Right,
Yes.
and right, like burnout. There was a very nice ABC News item. I think it was ABC News by Agrawal a couple of years ago, 2021, I think, about climate change burnout. Right, disabled climate change activists being burned out because of the lack of accessibility of the activist movement.
Yes.
And the tools they use. Right.
Absolutely, and it's the same with people in accessibility. We know a lot of accessibility. Also, it's the accessibility to burnout pipeline. I really need to thank you, and sorry to cut you short, but we've reached the end of our time, and I want to have another conversation with you, because I know you've done stuff on ESG and sustainability, and that's the topic that I'm particularly passionate about. So let's get you back on, because there's a wealth of other conversations to be had. So thank you.
One thing more when you say accessibility, that's another term. I think, the Canadian Accessibility, or the Accessibility Canada Act, right, just looked into, right, had listed all kind of barriers, and they added attitudinal barriers, which most people, when you say accessibility, they think ramp and they're all honky-dory.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Right? So attitudinal accessibility is absolutely important, and that's without that, the rest will not come. And we haven't reached the attitudinal accessibility.
And we've even put that in our company's definition of accessibility, so it's culturally and attitudinally available as well. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I need to thank MyClearText for keeping us captioned and Amazon for helping keep us on air. And thank you, Gregor. And I really look forward to continuing this conversation.
Yeah, sorry that I'm all the time. Once I ramble on.
No, it is good stuff.
It's a big topic.
Yeah.